Example 7, if f of x is equal to the square root of x and g of x is equal to the square root of 2 minus x, find each function and its domain. So if we have f composite g of x, well, that equals the definition f of g of x, which means that this becomes f of g of x, which is equal to the square root of 2 minus x. And now this becomes the input on the square root of x. So we know the function f is the square root of x, and instead of writing x, it's going to be the square root of 2 minus x. Okay, now keep in mind that what this represents is this is the square root of 2 minus x to the 1/2, because that is the square root of that. Which then means that this becomes 2 minus x to the 1/2 raised to the 1/2, which becomes 2 minus x to the 1/4, which means this is the fourth root of 2 minus x. So therefore, that's what we get for f composite g of x. Now we need to find the domain of this function. The domain of this function, we have an even index. So that means we need to take 2 minus x, and that means that it has to be either greater than or equal to 0. So if we subtract 2 to both sides, we get x, negative x is greater than or equal to negative 2. Let's scroll down a little bit here. And if we divide both sides by a negative, that means we flip the inequality to get x is less than or equal to 2. So the domain is either x such that x is less than or equal to 2, or we have negative infinity to 2 with a bracket. Okay, next, let's take a look at G composite F. So G composite F of x is equal to G of F of x, which is equal to G of F of x, which is the square root of x. And now we take 2 minus x, but that x now becomes the square root of x. So G composite F of x is the following. So that's what we get for this composite function. Now we need to find a domain. Well, there's two parts to this domain that we need to take into consideration. The first part is underneath the radical, which is square root of x. So that means that the domain of the square root of x is that x has to be greater than or equal to 0. And what else do we know? Well, we need to look at what's inside the radical. So we also need to consider the fact that 2 minus the square root of x has to be greater than or equal to 0. And we need to solve that. So we're going to subtract 2 to both sides. We're going to divide by -1 to flip the inequality. And then what we need to do is we need to square both sides to get x, which is less than or equal to 4. So when we graph this on the number line, we have 4. And so we know that x has to be less than or equal to 4. And we know that x has to be greater than or equal to 0, excuse me. So the domain goes from 0 to 4, or we can say that x is in between 0 and 4. Okay, next we have f composite f of x, which is equal to f of x. So that means that the input is f of x, which is the square root of x. And then the square root of x becomes the input, which is the square root of x. So recall, this is very similar to part A. This is the same thing as the fourth root of x. So this is our result. Now we need to find a domain. Well, the domain, since we have an even index, means that x has to be greater than or equal to 0. So we either know that x such that x is greater than or equal to 0, or we can have bracket 0 all the way to infinity. Okay, let's take a look at the last one here. We have g composite g of x, which is equal to g of x, which is equal to g of the square root of 2 minus x, which is equal to the square root of 2 minus the square root of 2 minus x. So very similar to part B, we know that this is our result. And so what we want to do is we want to find a domain. So we need to find the domain of this part under the radical, which is 2 minus x, which has to be greater than or equal to 0. And if you recall, we done that earlier, which became x is less than or equal to 2. And then we need to find 2 minus the square root of 2 minus x, and that has to be greater than or equal to 0. So we're going to subtract 2 to both sides. And then we're going to divide by a negative, so that means we're going to flip the inequality. And then what we're going to do is we're going to square both sides, so we get 2 minus x, which is less than or equal to 4. And now we're going to subtract 2 to both sides, so negative x is going to be less than or equal to 2. And then divide by a negative, that means that x is going to be greater than or equal to negative 2. So now let's take a look at this and this on our graph. So we know that at negative 2, we know it's going to be greater than or equal to. And then at positive 2, we know it's going to be less than or equal to. So therefore, the domain is going to be in between negative 2 and 2, or in set builder notation, we would write x such that x is in between negative 2 and 2. And then in set builder notation over here, let me go ahead and correct that over here, or just add to it. This means that x such that, and that's in braces, so we know that x is in between 0 and 4.